from the four corners of the earth and the far corridors of history. Dateline, World War II.
March 1944, Burma. A large engineer camp 60 miles outside the Burmese city of Tiddim becomes the first target of a complex and daring Japanese offensive. The operation is ultimately directed towards the capture of Imphal, a major Indian city located 100 miles to the north. The attack, under the command of Lieutenant General Renya Muraguchi, is intended to preempt an almost certain assault further into Burma by British General William Slim's 14th Army. Slim, who is indeed planning such an offensive and has been waiting for the Japanese to make the first move, is nonetheless caught completely off guard. The plan, as conceived by Muraguchi, calls for the westward penetration of the Indian border by a number of fast-moving columns. It is to open with the attack on Tiddim, intended to draw Slim's troops south, away from Imphal. Shortly thereafter, troops of Japan's 15th and 31st Divisions are to begin driving west toward Imphal and Kohima, two towns crucial to Slim's supply lines. By capturing the massive supply dumps in these cities, Muraguchi would prevent any further advances by the British. Now, as the attack on the engineer camp continues, members of the Indian 17th Division rush to defend the largely non-combatant population there. They guard the camp until they receive orders on 14 March to stage a fighting retreat toward the Imphal plain. To hamper their escape, Japan's 215th Regiment establishes a roadblock north of Tongzang. As the 17th battles through the roadblock, the second phase of the Japanese assault begins. On 16 March, Muraguchi's divisions to the northeast pour across the Chindwin River, rapidly advancing towards both Imphal and Kohima. At Slim's request, two divisions are airlifted from Akyab Airfield to Imphal. By the time they arrive on 19 March, Japanese soldiers are within 30 miles of the city. Through the rest of the month, the fighting is bloody, with little ground gained by either side. Due to the difficult terrain, battles for tiny patches of turf last days as additional British reinforcements flood into the area. Meanwhile, to the north at Kohima, the British find themselves in a precarious position. Thinking the terrain too treacherous for an assault by a large Japanese force, Slim has only a token garrison defending the city. Lieutenant General Sato Kotoku, however, has set his entire 31st Division against the city. As a result, Slim has been forced to rush paratroops in to stem the westward flow of Japanese troops. The battle for Kohima rages through the end of the month, with the British slowly losing ground. By 11 April, however, things begin to look up for the garrison as reinforcements from the British 2nd Division and the Chindit 23rd Brigade begin pouring into the area. By late April, the lines begin to stabilize in favor of the British. While the Japanese have succeeded in severing the road between Kohima and Imphal, their own supply lines are non-existent. Muraguchi gambled from the outset that his rapid advance would be rewarded with the immediate capture of supplies at Imphal. Now, his men are paying the price for his failed wager, falling prey to starvation and exhaustion at an alarming rate. For the British, the apparent turning of the tide allows an opportunity to look ahead rather than improvising defense. With Muraguchi's attack blunted, Slim can now prepare in earnest to drive the Japanese from Burma. 10 April 1944, Odessa. The Red Army, methodically driving the Nazis from the Soviet Union, enters the Ukrainian city, built on the shores of the Black Sea. Once known as the Russian Marseille, after the resort on the Mediterranean coast of France, today it lies in ruins, its people devastated, its future bleak. For the last 50 years, the story of Odessa and the Ukraine has been one of repeated, devastating occupations. The Soviets took the region during their push to overthrow the Tsar and kept it for themselves. In 1942, Odessa fell to the Romanian army, a force opportunistically allied with Hitler's Nazi regime. The Romanians, steeped in a history of ethnic resentment, went about the vile task of eradicating all vestiges of Russian influence and culture. That ethnic cleansing ended only 3 weeks ago when, in the face of the unstoppable Russian advance, the Romanians turned tail and ran. The Germans filled the power vacuum, knowing full well that their hold on the city, while brief, would afford them enough time to inflict some final cruelty and humiliation on Odessa and its residents, laying waste most of the city's buildings and murdering those people with whom they had even the most petty disagreement. There was, of course, no sane purpose to the Nazi actions. It is simple proof that the war in Russia, which began after the violation of a treaty that neither side had ever intended to honor, has at last fully degenerated into a kind of mutual psychosis. More than victory, both sides now seem to be concerned only with the instant gratification of revenge. It is clear that neither side remembers who started the seemingly endless string of atrocities, but both are committed to continuing them. What moral high ground there is in this situation belongs to the Soviets. The Ukraine, while historically independent, was before the war a Soviet republic, so dictator Joseph Stalin and his generals can make at least some claim that they are liberating the city. On 8 April, the Red Army attacked, using a force of more than 500,000 men to push the Nazis back. The heavy German tanks sank into the spongy ground while the wider-tracked Soviet T-34s sped steadily on. It took only 2 days for the Red Army to overwhelm the German rear guard. By taking the port city, they have isolated the entire German 17th Army, which sprawls across the Crimean Peninsula southeast of the city. The Nazis' slim hope of escape is to fall back to the town of Sevastopol at the peninsula's tip and pray they can hold out long enough to be evacuated across the Black Sea to Romania. Confronted with the plight of the 17th Army, Hitler ranted that he could spare no reinforcements. He and his general staff are consumed with the impending Allied cross-channel invasion and refuse to consider difficulties on other fronts until it is too late to do any good. Finally, with the 17th Army's fate basically sealed, the Fuhrer accedes to his commander's earlier request and grants the army permission to retreat. Still refusing to give away a foot of ground, however, Hitler orders the 17th to leave behind 50,000 men to defend the city until the Wehrmacht can repulse the Allied invasion of Europe, when and wherever it may come. Only then, the German mastermind says, will Sevastopol be relieved. On 18 April, while the Nazis in the Crimea formulate an evacuation plan, the Russians pull tight the noose around Sevastopol. Stalin, who wants to kill Nazis even more than he wants to preserve his own territory, orders hundreds of artillery pieces to be brought in so that the Red Army can pulverize the city, its occupiers, and its residents. That roundup of artillery, far from simplifying the destruction of the 17th, gives more than 100,000 Germans time to escape. For those left behind, however, there is no hope. That Hitler refuses to authorize a surrender matters little. Stalin is not inclined to take prisoners. On 3 May, Hitler, never one to blame himself for his shortcomings as a leader, fires his commander on the ground in Sevastopol. On 5 May, the Red Army launches its all-out final assault. Waves of artillery shells, Katyusha rockets, and tanks roll over the city. German troops are hunted down in the streets, and every last pocket of holdouts is pursued and eradicated. A few thousand prisoners are taken, but their destiny is little different from that of the dead in the streets. They are hauled off to points unknown where they will face Stalin's crude justice. This, on the Russian front, is what passes for liberation. The Nazis are gone from the Crimea, wiped deservedly from this pot of scorched earth. But what joy there is in the toothless smiles of civilians is tempered by the knowledge that, though liberated, they are far from free. Hitler's boot may be gone, but they are now back under the brutal thumb of Joseph Stalin. So in the end, for the poor peasants who must call this miserable place home, there has been little change at all worth celebrating. April 1944, the Admiralty Islands. Convoys carrying the American 24th and 41st Infantry Divisions rendezvous en route to Hollandia on New Guinea's north shore. As the invasion force draws ever nearer, the Japanese holding the town are subject to an intense 3-week artillery barrage and air assault. That softening up operation is devastating, with dozens of ships and hundreds of bombers saturating the area with high explosives. Hollandia's only significance is as a stepping stone. In the surrounding jungle are a handful of airstrips that General Douglas MacArthur needs for his anticipated assault on the Philippines. The general considers the recapture of the Philippines to be a matter of personal honor. Ordered to abandon his troops at Corregidor, he arrived in Australia expecting to find a massed and ready force, capable of launching an immediate counteroffensive. In fact, there was no army, and his commanders in Washington had not even made a strategic commitment to retake the Philippines. MacArthur, by sheer force of will, changed that, getting President Roosevelt to back his single-minded thrust toward Manila. A man obsessed, he leaves little room for failure. He prepares for a hard-fought battle, assigning a large force to attack Hollandia. On 22 April, the Hawaii-based 24th Infantry Division, which suffered impotently through the attack on Pearl Harbor, comes ashore at Tanamera Bay, on the west side of Hollandia, while 25 miles to the east, the men of the 41st Division land at Humboldt Bay. Expecting a pitched battle, the invasion force instead encounters light resistance. The Japanese in the area, largely inexperienced peasant conscripts, retreat, and the Americans are able to hack their way quickly through the jungle. Within a few hours, the air base at Aitape is in Allied hands. Engineers set to work immediately, repairing the runways and getting the base ready to accept aircraft. 2 days later, on 24 April, 24 Australian P-40s take up residence at the base, providing close air support for the invasion force. For 4 days, the 24th and 41st Divisions push toward each other. The Japanese, who had abandoned the beaches, stand their ground in the jungle. Progress, though consistent, is measured foxhole to foxhole. Hand grenades and flamethrowers are used to literally blast the stubborn enemy from their hiding places. Still, as the push continues, it becomes clear that the Americans are superior, not only numerically, but also logistically. They have food, ammunition, and medicine, as well as the manpower to carry the material through the jungles and waist-deep swamps. The Japanese, on the other hand, have been cut off from lines of supply for more than a month. They have little left to fight with, or for, but their own sense of personal honor. On 26 April, units of the 24th and 41st Divisions link up at Hollandia Airfield. By the next day, the town is firmly in Allied hands. The Japanese who had held the area are all either dead, captured, or so deeply hidden in the jungle that they can't fight. And MacArthur, who had been prepared to pay a much steeper price for Hollandia than the Japanese extracted, is one step closer to the Philippines. April 1944, London. In an effort to maintain strict security for Operation Overlord, the impending invasion of Fortress Europe, the British War Cabinet announces a strict new policy prohibiting uncensored radio traffic by foreign diplomats. In addition, no diplomatic couriers will be allowed to leave the country until after the invasion takes place. The only exceptions to the new rules are envoys of the United States and the Soviet Union. This, of course, infuriates Charles de Gaulle and the French Committee of National Liberation. But with the French penchant for switching sides, American and British commanders are taking no chances. Keeping an operation the size of Overlord a secret is, strictly speaking, impossible. Britain's eastern ports are teeming with hundreds of ships. Thousands of Allied troops are conducting large-scale landing exercises. Whole regions of Great Britain have been converted to storage yards for tanks, trucks, jeeps, ammunition, and all the other paraphernalia of war. The British people, who have stood fast in the face of doom for more than 4 years, are once again called upon to sacrifice in the name of freedom. Communication with even so close a neighbor as Ireland is cut off. Travel is strictly regulated, and a 10-mile area inland from the Channel is declared off-limits to all unauthorized personnel. Within this perimeter, there is an increasing sense of anticipation and apprehension. Desperate as they may be to get on with winning the war, men throughout the Allied ranks realize that the road home runs through Berlin. Where that road begins, on what unnamed beach, they do not know. The whens and wheres of the invasion are kept even from those who will execute the largest amphibious assault in history, charging an entrenched enemy that has proven himself a master of defensive warfare. Though the Germans know the invasion is close at hand, they are scrambling to find out when and where it will take place. Despite all the Allied efforts to maintain strict security, some information inevitably leaks out. A report smuggled out of the British Embassy in Turkey alerted the Germans to the Allied plans to invade northern France, but the information is sketchy. The report incorrectly identified the code name of the operation as Overlord. Fortunately for the Allies, the document did not contain the date and location of the invasion. Meanwhile, Allied bombers have begun targeting vital roads, bridges, and railroad marshalling yards, attempting to isolate a large area of northern France that includes not just the invasion beaches, but a long stretch of the French coast. The Allies have for months been leaking false information to the Nazis, hoping that confusion in the first hours after the landing will keep the Germans from reinforcing the invasion point. That time is crucial. Until a beachhead is established and docking facilities brought under Allied control, the invasion force will be extremely vulnerable. For now, the Nazis are forced to defend hundreds of miles of coastline and to guess what is a real invasion and what is a diversion. Back in England, the preparations continue. New equipment is tested that will be vital to the success of the operation. Dual-drive tanks, capable of propulsion at sea as well as on land, are to go ashore with the first wave. With a collapsible flotation skirt and an extended exhaust hood to prevent the engine from flooding, it is hoped that they can provide instant fire support to the exposed infantry. In an unprecedented engineering feat, the Allies are constructing artificial harbors called mulberries that will be towed across the channel after the beachhead is secure. Once in place, they will allow the troops to be effectively resupplied in the days immediately following the invasion. As usual, tension in the Allied High Command is running high. British General Bernard Montgomery fervently believes he, not Ike, should be Supreme Allied Commander of Overlord forces. He grudgingly accepts the reality of American command. The vast majority of the forces earmarked for France are, after all, American. Still, Monty demands that he at least be given command of the ground forces, which would relegate Ike to a figurehead position. To avert a blow-up in the Allied ranks at this critical juncture, Ike offers a compromise. Monty will command the ground forces for the invasion phase of the operation until Ike can safely establish his headquarters in France. Monty has little choice but to acquiesce. The date for the invasion is tentatively set for 5 June. On that day, tidal conditions will be right, and a bright moon will provide light for airborne operations. What cannot be predicted with any certainty is the weather. As the target date approaches, tension among Allied commanders grows. They know that despite all their planning and preparation, the success or failure of what will surely be the pivotal battle of the war will depend in large measure on the whim of Mother Nature.
From the four corners of the earth and the far corridors of history. Dateline, World War II.
May 1944, Cassino, Italy. In the early morning hours, the Allied forces facing the German defenses on the Gustav Line unleash a tremendous artillery barrage, marking the beginning of their latest attempt to break through. For nearly 4 months, the Allies have been hammering away at the German defenses to little avail. Bombardment of the monastery and Cassino itself has only served to give the Germans an easily defendable pile of rubble. Assault after assault has been repulsed, with the attackers suffering heavy casualties. For this latest push, however, the Allies are trying a different strategy. Instead of simply smashing through the formidable defenses, they are attempting a giant pincers movement to cut off the German defenders. Devised by French General Alphonse Juin, the new plan centers on an attack by his French Expeditionary Corps on the left flank of Cassino. When the artillery barrage lifts, Juin's troops press forward. Equipped largely with U.S. hardware, the 4 French divisions make good progress. The German 71st Division, badly outnumbered, fights desperately to slow the advance. The French, however, determined to erase the last vestiges of shame from their humiliating defeat in 1940, drive on. Within hours, they have pushed well into the German lines, capturing Mount Faito. Elsewhere, however, the attack meets with less success. To the right of the French, the British managed to gain 2 small bridgeheads over the Rapido opposite Cassino, but are quickly checked by stubborn German defense. To the north, Polish troops under the command of General Ladislaw Anders are badly bloodied by the elite German paratroops defending Monte Cassino. And on the far left flank, The U.S. Second Corps attacking up the coast is also stymied by the well-entrenched Germans. By 14 May, the Germans show signs of crumbling. Twain's troops lead the way, slicing through the defenses. Their stunning advance helps to inspire the Americans on the coast, who push the Germans back with increasing success. By 15 May, the Allies are on a roll. French success continues as they capture San Giorgio, and the British push well into the Liri Valley all the way to the town of Pignatoro. General Anders' forces, however, are still being held up by the paratroops defending the abbey. Time and again, the Poles advance, but the Germans, well concealed in the shattered ruins, drive them back with machine gun and small arms fire. On 17 May, the Germans rush reinforcements to the front to try and slow the Allied advance. Resistance stiffens, but the Allies continue to make gains. German General Heinrich von Wiedinghoff, realizing that his forces at Cassino are in danger of being cut off, decides that the time has come for a fighting retreat. On the morning of the 18th, General Anders' Polish troops launch a final push for the abbey, only to find that the Germans have largely abandoned their positions. After months of bloody fighting, the ancient monastery is finally in Allied hands. Meanwhile, the advance continues, but at a slower pace and at a higher price. The Germans, still a determined, disciplined force, have managed to regroup and are contesting every inch of ground, particularly in the Liri Valley. On 23 May, the Germans are dealt another blow. Just as it appears they may be able to solidify their lines, the Allied beachhead at Anzio erupts. A violent artillery bombardment is followed by an attack on Cisterna by 3 divisions of the U.S. Sixth Corps. American infantry and armored units plunge into the German lines. The fighting is vicious. The GIs press forward with fixed bayonets, attempting to rout the German defenders from their positions. Unmarked minefields take a heavy toll on both men and armor. Still, by noon of the 24th, the Americans reach the crucial Highway 7 southeast of Cisterna. Back on the Fifth Army front, the Allied offensive continues to make progress. The U.S. Second Corps pushes up the coast all the way to Terracina, while British, French, and Canadian forces crush the increasingly futile German resistance. Faced with an enemy advancing from the south and driving inland from Anzio, the entire German 10th Army is in grave danger of being cut off. So dire is their plight that even Hitler, who refused to contemplate retreat at Stalingrad, gives the order for the 10th to withdraw north to the Caesar Line. On 25 May, Cisterna falls, and on the shores of Lake Folian, elements of the U.S. Second Corps link up with Sixth Corps units from Anzio. Now, the town of Valmontone on Highway 6 is key to cutting off the retreating Germans. Getting there first is crucial. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring dispatches the Hermann-Göring Panzer Division to reinforce the town, and Field Marshal Harold Alexander orders General Mark Clark to make for the town with all haste. For Clark, however, the lure of Rome is too great. While he dispatches the 3rd Division to Valmontone, technically fulfilling his orders from Alexander, he turns the bulk of his forces to the northeast toward the Eternal City. The 3rd Division alone stands little chance of blocking the German withdrawal. And though there is elation in the Allied ranks that the bloody stalemates at Cassino and Anzio are finally broken, many commanders feel Clark has made an enormous blunder. Although Rome is well within his grasp, the commanders know that it is, after all, just another city. Once the revelry and celebration die down, the armies must move on. Then they will face another well-fortified German defensive line, manned, ironically, by the same troops Clark has just let slip through his hands at Valmontone. 18 May 1944, Berlin. Adolf Hitler, preparing for the Allied assault on Fortress Europe, reorganizes the highest ranks of his forces in France. He names 69-year-old Field Marshal Gert von Rundstedt Commander-in-Chief of the Western Armies. Directly under von Rundstedt is General Erwin Rommel, who has been stationed in northern France for months, directing the fortification of the Atlantic Wall. Neither Rommel nor von Rundstedt are pleased with the decision. The elder Field Marshal is openly dismissive of the Desert Fox's abilities. Rommel, for his part, resents being forced to report to von Rundstedt, already twice relieved of duty by Hitler. It quickly becomes apparent that the two commanders fundamentally disagree on the best way to defeat the impending invasion. Rommel, who believes that the invasion must be stopped on the beaches, has thrown himself into the task of making the Atlantic Wall nigh impregnable. For months, he has directed the construction and manning of countless pillboxes and bunkers along the coast, and the development and deployment of steel obstacles to prevent amphibious landings. He has ordered the flooding of low-lying lands to slow the Allied advance, and placement of over 5 million mines on the northern beaches of France and atop poles in possible airborne landing sites. All of these fortifications are testimony to his belief that the war will be won or lost on the beaches. Von Rundstedt compares the Atlantic Wall to France's Maginot Line, which he himself so easily bypassed in 1940. He instead believes that the Allies can only be stopped once they begin to push inland from the beaches. As a result, he plans to hold his armies in reserve, unleashing them upon the invading force once the Atlantic Wall is breached. One difficulty with this plan, however, is that with the Allies incessantly bombing German transportation routes, there is no guarantee that these forces will be able to move decisively to thwart a breakout. Another potential problem is that much of his force is made up of veterans of the Eastern Front. Although they are still weary and near broken from their travails there, the Field Marshal nonetheless trusts his troops more than Rommel's defenses. The conflict between two of Germany's greatest soldiers is no surprise to Hitler. Indeed, it serves his purpose to have potential leaders fighting one another rather than united, possibly against him. To make certain that neither man acquires disproportionate sway over the soldier in the field, Hitler places himself in command of the armored reserve in the Western Theater. He perhaps is right to be worried that his commanders in the West might turn on him. For although Rommel and von Rundstedt might differ in their approaches to combating the invasion, they both, if defeated, intend to ask Hitler to end the war and sue for peace. Tradition. What would military life be without it? Tradition is, after all, what binds the present to the past, one man to another. What makes a group of individuals into a battle-ready whole. Tradition can be a simple thing, the courtesy of a salute, the correct display of one's uniform. Or it can be something more complicated, more difficult to master, the correct handling of the stars and stripes, the Wild West arcana of a cavalry brigade chain of command. Or, for that matter, the wearing of a dress. Now, before anyone starts throwing punches around, well, maybe we'd better start at the beginning. Imagine a ship setting off on the dangerous run from Hawaii to the war in the Pacific. The crew is the regular mix of grizzled veterans and fresh recruits. The recruits are referred to by the mildly disparaging nickname shellbacks and are watched carefully, inspected almost daily, checked and rechecked, and naturally found wanting. Halfway across, there are rumors of mysterious messages being received in the radio room. The messages seem garbled, nonsensical, but are ominous nonetheless. Prepare, they say, for the arrival of King Neptune. The captain orders additional watch. Those posted are, this seems more coincidence than anything, shellbacks. Day and night they stare out to sea, growing bleary-eyed in their fear that they might miss something important, or perhaps even see something that wasn't there. Something out of the ordinary, even peculiar. Something that by all rules of logic and sanity could not possibly be there. The Master Chief in a dress, for example. Talk about your Poseidon adventure. Oh, we know, the Master Chief and his consort aren't really in dresses. It's more like, call it ceremonial robes. They are portraying King Neptune and various of his deep-sea denizens, come to inspect the ship and initiate the shellbacks into the fraternity of those salts who have crossed the equator. For as long as men have plied the open sea, there has been great superstition about crossing the Earth's invisible waistline. After crossing over, the sun ends up on the wrong side of the boat. The moon arcs eccentrically across a part of the sky where the moon is simply not supposed to be. And the North Star, the absolute navigational constant, disappears completely. Leave it to Americans to turn a moment of serious introspection into an occasion for a merciless frat house hazing. After all, it's just a little harmless fun, right? Well, sort of. But this is where it gets kind of weird. You see, as adolescent as this may seem, it does serve a purpose. The same purpose, in fact, that all military ritual serves. The binding of individuals into a battle-ready whole. In this case, the rite of passage allows the non-commissioned officers to loosen up in front of their charges. They cease to be intimidating elders and become more accessible to the men they will lead into battle. The inexperienced enlisted men, on the other hand, are recognized for passing a significant seafaring milestone. They are yet to be tested in battle, but at least they are no longer shellbacks. Tradition. It takes many forms, but in all of them, large and small, sublime and absurd, there is nobility, dignity, and, yes, even beauty. We just wish that King Neptune's date wasn't quite so hairy. In the end, the invasion the world has been waiting for comes down to one man, Dwight David Eisenhower. At war's outbreak, an obscure lieutenant colonel. A joyful and self-effacing man who will ultimately answer the world's question, when? The other questions have all been answered. That there would be an invasion of Western Europe has long been inevitable. Joseph Stalin, whose nation lies nearly destroyed, demanded it. The English and Americans promised their ally a second front years before they could deliver it. The Russians, in the meantime, fought in their own cities, losing millions of people to the war while their allies prepared. That task was worldwide, in factories and fields, in the hard work and deeply felt prayers of people who had never set foot in Europe, but who nonetheless did what they could to make the invasion a reality. Long after the preparations began, where the invasion would take place remained to be decided. Britain and the United States fought bitterly, one preferring to invade Europe from the south and the other the north. In the end, the simple fact that America would provide the majority of the manpower and materiel for the invasion gave it the deciding vote, the northern coast of France. The long process of assembly began, the building of a force like none before. Great Britain became a warehouse for men, food, ammunition, and equipment, along with the thousands of ships it would take to carry it all across the English Channel and into history. In August of 1943, the Americans and British had promised the Soviets an invasion by the following May. But when the date was finally set, it was later than that and deemed so secret that Stalin has not been told. 5 June, 1944. As the target date nears, Ike, understandably enough, is filled with doubt. There are so many variables to consider, so many details that may have been missed. Failure is a very real possibility. If the invasion force is thrown back, it will be years before the Allies can mount another. That would give the Germans more time to dig in, and the fragile alliance against them more time to fragment. The possibility of a long Nazi night over Europe looms large. The Germans know an invasion is coming, but they don't know where or when. Like the rest of the world, they are waiting, looking for clues, searching for some sign. On 1st June, they get it. A coded transmission from the Allies to the French underground over the BBC, a line of poetry. The long sobs of the violins of August. It might seem just a bit of broadcasting nonsense, but German spies have known for months the line is a call for readiness, that the invasion is very close. That same day in London, Ike and his staff begin to receive twice daily briefings on the weather. The long-term patterns are dismal. Winds that would keep even the hardiest ships in port. Clouds that would make air cover impossible. Eisenhower's counselors are far from unified. Some offer dire warnings of failure, last-minute appeals for changes in the plan. Among the most vociferous is British Air Chief Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory, who warns Eisenhower that the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, which are to be dropped behind Nazi lines to protect the invasion's right flank, will suffer 80% casualties. The assembled forces move forward. The world waits. The weather doesn't change. On 4 June, the troops board landing craft that do not budge from their docks. Supply ships are filled, stationed offshore, ready. The weather, however, still does not change, and the invasion is postponed. Aboard the ships, the troops huddle, waiting in near silence. On 5 June, the weather report improves marginally. The storms will still be near, but there will be breaks in the cloud cover, opening a 24-hour window. It is enough, and Eisenhower gives the order. 6 June 1944 will be the day. Eisenhower, remembering Lee Mallory's warnings, pays a visit to the men of the 101st Airborne Division. He jokes with the men, who seem more interested in comforting their obviously tired Supreme Commander than they are in being comforted themselves. They are young and confident, and in a few hours, some or perhaps all of them will lie bleeding far from home. And they will be there, Eisenhower knows, on his order. On the night of 5 June, as the ships begin to leave the docks and the aircraft begin to take off, both the Nazis and the French underground hear the same message broadcast on the BBC, the second coded line of poetry. Wound my heart with a monotonous languor, it says. The time, it tells them, is now.
From the four corners of the earth and the far corridors of history. Dateline, World War II.
June 1944, England. Just after midnight, enormous formations of Allied bombers, transports, and gliders depart for Normandy in the first phase of Operation Overlord. Aboard is the first wave of the long-awaited cross-channel invasion. Paratroops of the U.S. 82nd and 101st and British 6th Airborne Divisions. Their job is to defend the flanks of the invasion beaches by securing key bridges and road junctures. The tension in the air is palpable. There is the occasional joke, gallows humor in the face of fear. But mostly all that can be heard is the drone of the engines. In France, men and women of the resistance have been doing their part to prepare for this moment. For months, they have kept a close eye on German troop movements in the region and kept Allied planners well informed. Having received the signal from the BBC that the invasion is imminent, they have begun cutting German communication and rail lines. Meanwhile, the paratroops approach their jump zones. The signal comes. The men, burdened by heavy packs, struggle to their feet. They mumble faint final prayers and then green light. The men tumble from the planes. The invasion of Fortress Europe is on. The American jump zone is on the right flank of the invasion, near the town of Sainte-Mère-Église on the Cotentin Peninsula. High winds, however, play havoc with the parachutes, scattering the troops over a large area. The Germans kill many before they reach the ground, unleashing brilliant streams of anti-aircraft fire against the helpless invaders. French fields and pastures flooded by the Germans claim many of the jumpers who drown under the weight of their packs. Those arriving by glider fare no better. The difficult task of landing the gliders is made even more harrowing by mine-tipped stakes dotting the French countryside. Those missing the stakes, however, are by no means in the clear. Tiny miscalculations send many of the gliders cartwheeling out of control. The men who get safely to the ground find themselves alone, lost in the French countryside. Their senses peaked. Every snap of a twig or rustling leaf raises the hair on the backs of their necks. Slowly, they form into small groups, attempting to reach their objectives. Several units of the 82nd land directly in Sainte-Mère-Église. A vicious street-to-street battle erupts, but with surprise on their side, the paratroops succeed in driving the startled Germans from the town, thus securing the first French city to be liberated by the Allies. To the east, the troops of the British 6th Airborne Division are charged with securing bridges over the Dives and Orne rivers. In addition, they are to silence a massive German battery near Merville that is zeroed in on the far eastern invasion beach. In a daring maneuver, the Brits in Horsa gliders land mere yards from a crucial bridge over the Orne. The Germans, caught completely off guard, are quickly routed. A small cafe near the bridge is set up as a field hospital, and the troops brace themselves for a counterattack. Near Merville, things don't go as easily. Upon landing, the battalion designated to silence the battery is shattered, reduced from 700 to merely 150 men. The survivors know that if they don't knock out the battery, the landings will be cut to pieces. Fighting overwhelming odds and lacking proper equipment, they attack. Casualties are horrendous as the men fight their way through the German defenses, but within an hour they have claimed their costly prize. After a harrowing night, the roar of naval gunfire can be heard in the distance. It is a welcome sound to the weary ears of the Allied paratroops. They have done their part to assure the success of Operation Overlord. Both flanks are secure, and exit roads from the beaches are in Allied hands. The airborne troops must hang on until relieved, but for now, all they can do is pray for the thousands of men who are about to step into history on the beaches of Normandy. 6 June 1944, the Normandy coast. The waiting is over. All of the preparations of the past 3 years culminate in this moment. The vast Allied invasion fleet, determined to wrest Europe from the grip of Adolf Hitler, unleashes thousands of tons of high explosives on the German defenders ashore. Aboard the transports, men begin to board the smaller landing craft that will carry them ashore into the teeth of the German defenses. A storm in the channel mercilessly pounds the tiny open craft as they begin to assemble into assault waves. Pitching to and fro, the men are drenched by the cold ocean spray and their stomachs roil. The beach has been divided into 5 landing zones. To the far west, a beach codenamed Utah is to be assaulted by the U.S. 7th Corps under the command of General Lightning Joe Collins. To their east, on Omaha Beach, the U.S. 5th Corps will land under the command of Major General Leonard Giroux. Taking the 3 eastern beaches, Gold, Juno, and Sword, falls to the 1st and 30th British Corps, commanded respectively by Lieutenant Generals J.T. Crocker and G.T. Bucknell. As the landing craft approach, the naval and aerial bombardment builds to a crescendo. The beach erupts in geysers of smoke and flying debris. On the far left, on Sword Beach, the men of the British 3rd Infantry Division meet lighter resistance than expected. The German defenders are largely conscripted Russians and Eastern Europeans, not top-of-the-line Wehrmacht troops. The Brits quickly fight their way off the beaches and begin pushing inland to link up with the paratroops of the 6th Division. On Juno, the Canadian 3rd Infantry Division comes ashore. Underwater mines destroy many of the landing craft before they reach the beach, and tank support is late to arrive. Once ashore, however, the Canadians begin to push inland. Here, too, the defenders are largely foreign conscripts. They put up a token fight, but are not inclined to die for the glory of the Fuhrer. Prisoners pour in. On Gold Beach, the British right flank, assault troops run into stiffer resistance. Here, German gun emplacements that survived the pre-invasion bombardment pound the beach, and the 50th British Infantry Division bogs down. Troops continue to stream ashore, however. The Germans eventually give way. The Brits begin to break out toward Bayeux. American troops coming ashore at Utah Beach are pulled 2,000 yards east of their assigned zone by strong coastal currents. What appears at first to be disastrous for the U.S. 4th Division turns out, in fact, to be a lucky break. The defenses in this area have been wholly decimated by naval gunfire. Giant coastal guns are heaps of twisted metal, and machine gun pits have been buried in avalanches of sand and debris. Resistance is quickly smashed, and by afternoon, advance units have made contact with the paratroops of the 82nd. On Omaha, however, disaster looms. The rough seas and bitter German resistance threaten to throw the men of the U.S. 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions back into the sea. Prevented by underwater obstacles from approaching too close to shore, assault troops and armor are deposited in up to 6 feet of rolling sea. Dual-drive tanks, unable to weather the heavy surf, sink long before reaching shore. The men, heavily laden with equipment, struggle through the chest-deep water, subjected to streams of machine gun fire and crashing shells. Many who are wounded, unable to fight the surging sea, drown. Those who reach shore huddle behind beach obstacles, gasping for breath, longing for safety. The only place that offers any measure of safety, however, is a low seawall up to 300 yards inland. To reach it, they must bolt across the open beach, which is raked by German machine gun fire. Hundreds die in the frantic dash. The beach is littered with the broken bodies of men and smoldering equipment. The tide runs red with blood. In the struggle for individual survival, unit cohesion is entirely lost. Casualties among officers are shocking. Leaderless, the stunned men, many lacking helmets, weapons, and ammunition, huddle helplessly behind the seawall. The beach quickly garners the morbid nickname Bloody Omaha. By mid-morning, the outcome is still in doubt. In an effort to break the German stranglehold on the beach, destroyers pull in close to shore and pound the German positions at close range. The tactic is risky. There is little margin for error, and the ships are well within the range of German artillery. It doesn't take long, however, for the sailors to home in on their targets and silence some of the Nazis' most effective defensive positions. The veteran troops of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, begin to drive up the surrounding bluffs. Their push is heroic, and by 11 o'clock they capture their first objective, the town of Virville. Soon thereafter, resistance slackens, and follow-up troops begin to pour ashore. The landings have been a success. Despite the horrendous losses at Omaha, casualties have been far lighter than expected. Now, with troops ashore on 5 beaches, the Allies must quickly consolidate the beachhead and begin to drive inland. For although the first giant step has been taken, there remains a long journey ahead. June 1944, Normandy. Shortly after midnight, the stillness of the French night is broken by the drone of hundreds of aircraft passing overhead. First thought to be just another flight of Allied bombers, it quickly becomes apparent that this is much more. The alarm is sounded. The Allies are coming. Although the German troops have for months known that sooner or later they would have to face an Allied invasion, they are stunned to see them on this night. Their commanders from the highest levels have assured them that the weather conditions are far too severe for the Allies to attempt an assault. So comforted by the poor weather, many top commanders are not at their headquarters. Heading up this list is Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who is in Berlin conferring with Hitler and celebrating his wife's birthday. The commander of the 7th Army, Colonel General Friedrich Dollmann, whose forces guard the beaches from Caen to the Cotentin Peninsula, has gone, along with much of his staff, to a map exercise in Rennes. Many other officers, their superiors absent, avail themselves of the French nightlife. At 7th Army headquarters, reports begin to filter in about the Allied paratroop landings. At first, the information is sketchy, indicating scattered Allied airdrops south of Cherbourg and near the Orne River. Those reports quickly change, as excited local commanders erroneously report over 96,000 Allied paratroops landing all over Normandy. Dollmann, upon receiving the information, wastes no time in reacting. Convinced the fight for France is on, he alerts the entire 7th Army. Word is then passed up the chain to Commander-in-Chief West, Field Marshal Gert von Rundstedt. By 6 a.m., von Rundstedt is convinced this is a major invasion of northern France and contacts Hitler to secure the release of the Panzer divisions held in reserve. Amazingly, he is told that the Fuhrer is sleeping and is not to be awakened. Shortly after 6 a.m., with naval gunfire crashing down around them, the defenders of the Normandy beaches scramble to battle stations. Peering out to sea, they are amazed to see an armada unlike any ever assembled, with thousands of landing craft bearing down on the beaches. Many of the defenders have no stomach for fighting such an overwhelming force, but the men of the elite 352nd Division, guarding Omaha Beach, are determined to drive the invaders into the sea. Nestled in the hills overlooking the landing zone, they rake the beach with machine gun, mortar, and artillery fire. It's like a shooting gallery. There's a grudging respect for the Americans who doggedly advance in the face of such deadly fire. Back in Berlin, Hitler, now awake, is highly agitated. He sharply questions his generals. Well, is it or isn't it the invasion? Could this be a diversion for a main assault on the Pas-de-Calais? No one is certain. Finally, at 3, 12 hours after receiving the first report, Hitler releases the panzers to support the 7th Army. It may be too late. The battle for the beaches, so crucial in Rommel's strategy, is over. Although fierce fighting rages inland, the Allies have a solid beachhead over a wide stretch of coast. Still, the panzer divisions are fierce, quite capable of turning the tables on the Allies. Time is crucial. They must reach the coast quickly if they are to make a difference. Rommel speeds back from Berlin. When told of the invasion, the field marshal, cursing his reliance on the weather, comments to an officer, "How stupid of me. How stupid of me." 6 June 1944, New York City. At 3:32 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, first word of the Normandy invasion is broadcast to the United States via shortwave radio from General Eisenhower's headquarters in Britain. As word spreads, the world becomes an audience captivated, and the phrase European theater takes on new meaning. Everyone, everywhere, is terrified and thrilled by the spectacle unfolding on the Norman stage. Among the first to hear the news are the swing shift workers in the factories which produced the props for the drama, the very vehicles and weapons making the invasion possible. Upon hearing of the landings, many stopped their work to share a moment of prayer before rousing their sleeping loved ones with frantic phone calls. Europeans first learn of the invasion in a number of ways: radio broadcasts, word of mouth, and newspapers. The people of Britain, suffering these 4 years the constant worry and strain of life on the defensive, scour the papers for every detail of the Allied onslaught. Rumors run rampant. The English gaze at the southbound transports and bombers, hoping that they are more than aircraft, that they are also harbingers of peace. The people of France, some of whom first hear of the invasion through the shots and explosions of battle, gain something which they have dreamed of since the Nazi invasion: the promise of freedom. Across the country, citizens collectively hold their breaths in anticipation of an end to their long occupation. For the German people, the papers bring less joy. Confusion and tight Nazi censorship result in reports that are unrealistically positive. Readers of the news, however, cannot help but feel a bit of dread. The German people, for the first time, have an inkling that perhaps the Third Reich's moment in the sun is coming to a close. Little do the men on the beaches know that they are the world's actors. While the names of their directors are famous, the fate of the world hinges on the performance of the bit players. The prayers and hopes of entire nations rest not with Generals Eisenhower, Montgomery, or Rommel, but with men struggling in the sand, their names unknown to all but a handful of loved ones. The generals, too, have for a short while been relegated to the status of audience members. They spend the day like the rest of the world, anxiously awaiting reports of success or failure. A day's worth of reports pile up. Casualties, while high, are not as grievous as expected. Prior to the landings, estimates had soared to as many as 25,000 Allied dead and wounded. As the grisly count mounts in reality, however, it adds up to 10,000. A full quarter of these are comprised of the first men into France, airborne units who dropped behind enemy lines before daybreak. Another quarter of the casualties are men lost in the battle at Omaha Beach. That fight, while brutal, seems to have finally fallen in the Americans' favor. Lines have stabilized, and the men have been able to dig in, preparing for the next day's battle. As D-Day draws to a close, Allied commanders who have spent months planning must now use a very different skill. Their elaborate plan finally set into motion. The generals must now prepare to improvise, to abandon what is carefully considered in favor of daring gambles. What this means in the coming months is anyone's guess. But one thing is certain. For the civilians who knew nothing of Overlord yesterday, for the generals who had only a plan, and for the soldiers who were simply awaiting orders, the world has changed. After years of waiting, suffering, and watching, the curtain has finally risen on the drama that will decide the fate of the world.